chaos between the army and the civilian division, the Sudan's military and the civilian leaders have reached a deal. In the latest, the military has reinstated ousted Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Apart from this, the military has also announced the release of all political leaders that were arrested since the October 25th coup. As a part of the 14-point deal between Sudan's top general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, Hamdok will form an independent cabinet of technocrats.
التوقيع على هذا الاتفاق الإطاري يفتح الباب واسع لمعالجة كل قضايا الانتقال وتحدياته. بكل تأكيد السنتين اللي فاتوا في هذه الشراكة أنجزنا فيها الكثير. فك العزلة الدولية، خروج السودان من قائمة الدول الراعية للإرهاب، الاقتصاد، السلام، دي إنجازات كبيرة جدا، لكن تظل هنالك تحديات كبيرة جدا بتواجهنا.
Hamdok was placed under house arrest when the military seized power on the 25th of October. And since then, the coup has triggered mass demonstrations against the military, which upended the country's fragile transition to democracy. Now, joining us live on this broadcast from South Sudan is Dennis Dumo, who is a senior journalist, and our correspondent from Khartoum, Naba Mahideen. Good evening to you both. Dennis, coming to you first. The focus could be more on political stability in the country despite this deal. Take us through the political situation currently.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you can heard from Prime Minister Hamdok just a few minutes ago on your program, talking about the kind of achievement that has succeeded during his period when he was appointed, removing Sudan from, the list of terrorism, and also, unlocking all the locks that was put on Sudan during the regime of Umar Hassan al-Bashir. So he was trying to look at those achievements that was done during his tenure in office as a Prime Minister of Sudan. And then the other issue now to look at is the issue of the challenges that he has mentioned in his speech today upon reaching the deal. He said he has accepted the position knowing that at the back of this, there is a challenges that is going to face him. So, but looking at all this kind of, disagreement between the military and the civilian rule is actually one of the things that when you see it of Khartoum, you see a lot of protesters are going to the street of Khartoum demanding for civilian government, which is now under Prime Minister Hamdok. And then from the military side, they still look at the current situation in Sudan that needs really their presence to be there to be able to rule. So it is still remain a challenge in front of ahead of Hamdok cabinet, because of course in this deal it has given him the powers to independently form a technocrat government. And now with the pressure that is coming from the street of Khartoum, the protesters on the street demanding to see into it that the situation change within the shortest period, and this is something that is going to be a challenge. And another challenge on this is that the forces of the freedom and change, they have came out and declared that they are not part, either they are not going to recognize this deal between the military leaders and the Prime Minister Hamdok. So having all this is still, like I've mentioned earlier on, is a challenge that ahead of Prime Minister Hamdok. And then now looking at the international community, the Troika countries, the US and the other countries, they really wanted to see into it that the military handed over the government to the civilians.
Right. I just want to touch on one point that you made there, Naba. This question to you. What are the reasons behind the deal? What are the ground sources saying?
The reason behind the deal is the escalation by the political forces and by the pro-democracy groups after 3 weeks of turmoil and after the military seized the power on October 25th. The second reason is there was growing call to reinstate Abdullah Hamdok, and there was some internal mediation and also international efforts to reinstate Abdullah Hamdok, because he representing the civilian spirit and the civilian-led government that the protesters want since October 25th. But this deal timing now is making the protesters angry, because they think that Abdullah Hamdok jumped over the political parties, specifically Freedom and Change Forces, which is the umbrella that backed the protest against al-Bashir. And they think also Abdullah Hamdok is giving the military coup more legitimacy by excluding the political parties by the protest against al-Bashir. So the reason is to stop escalations, to make a mutual groundings, and also to preserve the 2 years of accomplishment that Sudan has made in the past 2 years, including the removal of from the list, the blacklist, and also involving in the international community and financial institutions. But it's sensitive timing now, this deal, despite that it came after a lot of pressure, and it came after very big turmoil and escalation, but also it may lead to more fragile situation and more unclear situation.
Right. Now we know that protests took place today as well. What is the situation in Khartoum right now?
Actually, there were some calls of protest were released last night before the news about Abdullah Hamdok will be reinstated. But it was the calls for the protests were not so big. There was a planned March of Millions on November 25th. But after this political deal came out of sudden, the protesters are angry and more defiant, and the protest is bigger now in different Sudanese cities and states, because they think Hamdok is jumping over a lot of demands. They said yes, reinstating Hamdok is one of the demands by the protesters, but not the only one, because they also want a transitional justice. They want punishment of the killing of at least 40 protesters since the military took power. They want a civilian-led government. They just don't want the military with a new political pool in the country, or a new political facade, as they said, to lead the transitional period. So the protest now is ongoing, and we may see more protests, and the security forces is dealing with it with tear gas and some live ammunition to disperse the protest. And I think this day is a different day and a new day that they may lead for a new political scene in Sudan, because Abdullah Hamdok was the winning card for the protesters. But with this sudden deal and without enough consolation with the political parties and excluding of FFC that backed the protest against al-Bashir, it may lead to more turmoil and to divide the street into two: anti-Hamdok protests and people who also agree with this political agreement to preserve the gains of the December revolution. So yes, it's really unclear, and the situation may get very complicated in the next coming days.
Right. Now, just finally, what are some of the key points of the 14-point deal that has been reached?
The main point is to keep the partnership with the military. It's a new deal, but also they said the constitutional draft will be a reference, the same constitutional draft that the military suspended on October 25th. And also one of the things that is to keep the dates of the fresh elections on time, which is 1.5 years from now, and to make wider consultations with the other political parties, leading to a constitutional conference, and also to complete other governance structures, including the Legislative Council, and which was not formed in the past 2 years, and also to widen or to broaden the political parties that will participate in the new government, excluding the National Congress, which is the Congress or the party of al-Bashir and al-Bashir loyalists. Also to complete and to preserve the December Revolution gains and to move on the plans and to move on in the relations with the international community and international institutions. And yes, but mainly to make very big efforts to make the partnership between the military and civilians successful. Above all, is to appoint new government out of technocrats and excluding the political parties. And yes, it's about sharing agreement, but without that form of sharing of positions and ministries in the past, to make mutual groundings between all the political parties and all the pro-democracy groups in the country.
Right, just one more thing. How important was the role of international pressure in the reaching of this deal there in Sudan?
Observers and analysts think without the international community, this deal will never find a way, because before the military has promised with releasing Abdullah Hamdok and political detainees many times, and whenever they promise with this, we see more turmoil and fragile situation, and we see a march of millions and killings of the protesters. So people think the international community, headed by the U.S., is the sponsor of this political deal, because Abdullah Hamdok is a very important character. Abdullah Hamdok was leading the change during the past 2 years as an independent character, and he has very good relationship with the international community because of his past position in the UN Economic Commission in Africa. So yes, Abdullah Hamdok is very important internally for the political powers because he is independent, and internationally because of his background and also his profession. So people think and always think that the U.S. is leading these efforts, and we saw some delegations and diplomatic efforts were made. Whenever there is a deadlock in negotiations, we see U.S. and a lot of other Western countries we're making efforts to make it successful. So yes, international community, yes, made this deal reality.
Right. Now, Dennis, coming back to you, will you take us through the role of international pressure in the reinstating of Prime Minister Hamdok? Also, could this deal result in the reversal of similar takeovers in Africa, like in Guinea, for example?
There was a very massive, pressure from international community. First of all, looking at Sudan coming from a transition of the former Hassan al-Bashir, moving now to a led civilian government. And they wanted to see into it that with now unlocking all the keys that they have before putting Sudan under a list of terrorism and open the economic doors for Sudan, they really wanted to see into it that the money that will be coming to Sudan is really being used with the government in place, which is a civilian government. And another thing to look at also at this, the international press, is that the fighting in Darfur and Nuba Mountain, which is been by South Sudan by President Salva Kiir. They are looking at this. This is one of the longest, fighting in conflict in Darfur region, Nuba Mountain and South Kordofan. And they wanted to see into it now that the fact that there is a kind of new system in place in Sudan, they also wanted these forces in these areas that I've mentioned to move back to Sudan, because it is really costing the international community a lot of money to invest both in humanitarian assistance to these communities, and both also, using money to bring these parties together. That's why you can see that there is these other groups which are not signatory to the Juba Peace Agreement, which was signed in Juba, have come, like Abdel Wahid Al-Nur. He is now in Juba here, been hosted by the government of South Sudan, and looking to also another senior SPLM North General Abdulaziz Mohamed Hilo is also here in Juba, which is not, they are not actually, these are Hollard's group. They are not part of the current Juba peace agreement. But there is a hope that with the presence of Hamdok, he's trying to, sign a kind of initial, let me say, a memorandum of understanding especially between SPLM North, led by Abdulaziz Mohamed Hilu, to make sure that the fighting along this region of Southern Kordofan and Bulu Naute State has come to an end. And this is, for international community, they look at it as Hamdok is also can play that role, being a civilian kind of a technocrat and a politician who can be able to manage that. Of course, these are the practices across Africa. Come again?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd like to thank both of my guests, Dennis Dumo from South Sudan and Naba Mohideen from Khartoum, for all the latest coming out of